Good afternoon, everyone. I call the Committee of Supply Section C to order. We're meeting today to continue consideration of the estimates of the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. I now recognize the Minister to move the vote.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I move that be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $4,359,801,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, Ministry Operations, to March 31st, 2022.
Thank you, Minister. I now recognize the member for Peace River North.
Thank you, Chair. And this is a really easy one for me. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, the member of, I'm going to get this wrong. I'm going to look. It's here on the screen, Surrey South, who is going to ask some questions on accessibility.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Minister and staff. I know that we'll be supporting you. Thank you for being here. This is a good opportunity for us to ask just a few questions about the portion of your portfolio that looks at accessibility. And I will apologize, this first question goes back a bit. But looking back, I'm hoping through you, Madam Chair, that the Minister can refresh my memory. Can the Minister share, please, what the final tally was cost-wise for the consultations held from September to November in preparation for the development of the Accessible British Columbia Act?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and I would just like to re-welcome the member for Surrey South. It's always good to have a chance to chat, and this is a good opportunity to answer some questions that I know she and others are interested in knowing. And just a quick answer to that, we were given $500,000 and that was expended during that period.
Member.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to the Minister. I recognize this year that the Ministry's budget has a modest increase in the Office of the Minister to support what I believe it says are the Parliamentary Secretary, Strategic Planning and Legislation, and an Accessibility Directorate. Could the Minister explain, please, what proportion or dollar figure of the increase is dedicated to the Directorate?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. You take off your mask and your glasses with one move. The Accessibility Directorate, their operating budget for 2021-2022 is $700,000.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the Minister. I appreciate the mask challenges. I have the same challenge with earrings. Now, does the Ministry anticipate, let's be positive, that the Act continues through the House? Does the Act, or does the officer in the budget anticipate increased staffing for that directorate as a result? Or are we looking at continuing on with the current complement of staff in the ministry that's been working on the development of the legislation.
Minister.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the question. We're going to continue on using, well, obviously with the same staff at the Advisory Accessibility Secretariat, and for the costs of the Provincial Accessibility Committee in the beginning part, the first year is a lot of the setting up of the structures will probably be around $50,000, which will be funded internally.
Member.
I think, Honourable Chair, that the Minister is almost anticipating my question. So this $700,000, I wondered if that was going to also support the accessibility and technical committees that will be established, but I understand now that that won't, and that will be absorbed. So the Minister has stated $50,000 is anticipated needed for the accessibility committee to get established. What about the technical committees and the work that will be ongoing? Clearly, that is not a lot of money to look after committees with 16 members in some cases, or what have you. So does that mean that those committees won't be operational in this year, or that the Minister will have to go to Treasury Board repeatedly to continue the work dictated under the Act?
Minister.
Thanks for that question, and I know that there'll be a lot of encouragement from all parties for us to ensure that we're well funded when the meat gets put on the bones, as it were. But the first year we'll be setting up the committee and probably identifying the standards, the beginning processes, and then we'll be going to the Treasury. The Treasury Board expects us to be going to make a request in the fall for the next year's budget.
Thank you.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. The statements made so far and in introduction and in the media also talk about the Minister's role in promoting accessibility as the Act rolls out. So with that, what is the ministry budget for advertising related to the promotion of accessibility issues?
Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. And I know that getting the information out to the public and to the community is essential, and I'll be doing that in all my, as part of my responsibilities, regularly meeting with groups within the communities, the disability communities, and with community members who are part of the overall process. In terms of specific advertising budget, we have a communications department, we have a communications director, and as things become more, like as we go into the second year, it's likely that our method of communicating with the public will evolve, shall we say? But for the moment, we have a accessibility secretariat, we have a communications directorate, and we'll use the mechanisms that we currently have in order to raise public awareness.
Member.
That would be interesting. With absolutely no disrespect intended to the minister or any of those very committed staff. Getting the message out beyond people with disabilities and the disability community is what's going to make or break the building and the enforcement and the change that we ultimately need, because it isn't the people with disabilities that need to know what's going on. It's the public, I would argue, and the broader society and broader government. And there's a lot of work to do in raising awareness. And certainly, I know as the Accessible Canada Act has rolled out, they've done a fair amount of work in that regard to promote inclusion. And I would expect that the ministry will also need to be building that into their budget and their requests of Treasury Board or of the global government advertising budget. But moving on, I'm assuming I know for a fact that the minister will be aware, because he is well informed on these issues. But there have been a number of concerns brought forward by advocates from the learning disability community, dyslexia, other invisible disabilities, about the lack of clarity around whether or not they will be included in the committees and technical committees and so on as we move forward. And I understand some of this we can deal with at committee stage, and I'm not attempting to discuss the bill here itself. But can the minister provide some semblance of his intentions and his ministry's intentions around including people with learning disabilities, representatives of that community, of the community that deals with dyslexia, for example, in future actions of the ministry and across government service delivery areas, because there's been a consistent challenge in ensuring representation for some of these invisible disabilities, and I think we need some intentional inclusion. And I'm wondering what the minister and the ministry are doing to raise the awareness of that across government.
Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity that the member provides to clarify and perhaps put at ease any lingering doubts as to the intention of this legislation. I believe that intention is clear when you realize that our goal was not to list all possible the various disabilities that exist. Our goal was to use the social definition of disability, to speak to the barriers that exist in society, and to address the removal of barriers, the prevention of barriers after the identification of barriers in society. So the list is not an exhaustive list that's in the legislature. It's an illustrative list. And because of that, we haven't named all of the possible barriers people have when it comes to accessing all that British Columbia society has to offer. So I'm confident that the language that we used is careful in that it is not exclusionary in any way, and that it is most inclusive as it can possibly be. That's the intention of the Act. That's that I believe reflected in the Act, and I hope that provides some peace of mind for those who were wondering why they didn't see necessarily their particular circumstances reflected in the legislation.
Member.
Minister, and I do understand that, and again, we can discuss that more at committee stage. However, I guess the piece of my question that the minister hasn't yet addressed is what work is he doing within his ministry and as an advocate across government to ensure that this group of individuals and other groups, frankly, are not being forgotten, and that what is government doing to proactively address issues before we get to the stage where the committees have created standards and regulations and we have defined who this act even applies to. What's being done proactively within government to eliminate barriers today?
Minister.
Thank you very much for the question. And I just want to say that the proactive nature of our work was reflected in not just the extensive consultation period leading up to where we are now, but it's going to characterize the work that begins as soon as royal assent hopefully is provided or given. And the first job, of course, is to set up the Provincial Advisory Committee, which will be essential to informing government on how to proceed with the implementation of the legislation. I'd also point out that Parliamentary Secretary for Accessibility, the member for Chilliwack, his mandate is essentially to consult, to go to community and to receive coordinated responses from community members, from groups, from representatives, from advocacy organizations, to ensure that all the voices that need to be heard on the specific standards and for the specific organizations are heard. We also have the Accessibility Legislation Advisory Committee, which meets regularly, which has broad membership, membership that goes beyond even the membership at the table. They represent individuals and other groups that whose voice is welcomed and sought out by our government in order to ensure that the legislation is implemented the way we want, which is, I hope, the way other people in this, other members of the legislature would like it to be as well. The Secretariat, the Accessibility Secretariat, works as in its nature is to work across government in various ministries to ensure that the information that the government wants to lead our accessibility charge is well understood. And so I hope that people in the community are ready to go as soon as royal assent is provided, so that their expressions of interest to be part of this process is heard. And I haven't mentioned the technical advisory committees, but they too will be made up from the broad community citizenship expertise in the particular area of the standard development. So I think we can say proactively we've set the stage for ongoing good, thorough consultation. There's a parliamentary secretary whose mandate is essentially to do that, and in addition to all the other methods that we have to consult with the public.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the desire and intent for this, the scope of this work to be broad and have the community engaged and so on. And indeed, the community has been engaged now for a number of years, starting in 2013 when we did a consultation for Accessibility 2024, followed by the consultation this government did in 2019 for this act, followed by the ongoing conversations of the committee, as the minister mentions, and so on. And I guess my concern is that the work has gone in, advocates and individuals have been giving of their time and emotion and desire to see change, and have shared with government in many ways what needs to be different. And yet now we're going to look to set up a committee that will then look to articulate what needs to be different. And that's, I guess, some of what I'm trying to get at here. What has government done? What has this ministry done internally to prepare other ministries for the work they need to do, that they will need to do? For example, has the minister had conversations with the Ministry of Health, or the minister or the ministry had conversations with the Ministry of Health discussing the inaccessibility of healthcare, basic accessibility, like exam tables that are not wheelchair accessible? Has that type of discussion happened about the very real barriers that are faced on a daily basis that the ministries are going to need to look to address once these standards are put in place?
Just a friendly reminder that there will be many opportunities to discuss the details of legislation and communicate committee stage of bills going forward. Just a friendly reminder. Minister.
Well, thank you very much. And the problem sometimes with specific questions is we look for the specific answer, but I think in this particular case, the member was looking for sort of a general overview on how are we going to address accessibility issues within the public or governance system, in the public system. How are we going to make sure that education, healthcare, that other aspects of government public services are fundamentally at the core of this legislation. So my answer is that yes, indeed, the first plan, the expectation is that the Provincial Advisory Committee will direct government to address what areas need to be our primary focus. So, you know, throughout this last year, the discussions were obviously dominated by current issues, and we were pleased that the Social Service Sector Roundtable, the Reimagining Community Inclusion Group, and others were often preoccupied with issues of immediate health issues. And Dr. Bain-Smith, I just want to say, has been of great value to the sector in making sure that the healthcare needs and the concerns of people who may be more vulnerable than others were addressed by our system of healthcare. But to answer the member for Surrey South's question about where does government fit in, government is the beginning. Government will be the first. Government standards will be set and will lead the way.
Member.
Thank you, Minister. That is through the chair. What I was getting at, it wasn't meant to be an ask on a specific question. It was an example I was trying to get at, and I appreciate the answer. And I appreciate the guidance of the chair. We are not trying to debate the legislation. The challenge is certainly here to talk about the role of the ministry in the fact that the ministry is the holder of the accessibility and inclusion file for government. And I will try to keep my questions broad enough in that vein. With that, the consultations that the ministry has done, the papers that the ministry has issued in the past reference the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, specifically Article 9, accessibility. So with that, are there any aspects of the CRPD Article 9 that the ministry does not anticipate government actioning? second way to ask that question. Are there aspects of Article 9 that the province feels are the responsibility of another level of government?
Minister.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the question. So government does support the convention and its optional protocol. What I think, and I don't have it in front of me, but I do know that there's a lot of reference to other levels of government. I think that the approach that we will be obviously taking is working with other levels of government to see where our interests diverge and where they overlap. And so yes, we support the convention, and I'm quite sure a member is going to have a follow-up question on that. I hope to be fast enough to allow her to ask all the questions she wants, because I know this estimates process sometimes takes time. I'm sorry about that.
Member.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and I appreciate the speed with which you're providing answers, and I don't expect we will get deep into some of this, because I recognize that is for another process in this House. However, I will ask another question again, given that your ministry, the ministry, has the responsibility to house and promote access and inclusion broadly outside of government as well as in, and we had Global Accessibility Awareness Day a couple of weeks ago, which focuses on digital accessibility. And of course, it's National Accessibility Week, as the Minister knows. So I think it's fitting to ask the question, how will the ministry address digital accessibility within government and other processes. And for example, our legislature website, access to Hansard of our debates that we are using right now, the reality is it poses significant issues and barriers for people with vision loss and blindness in accessing the work of MLAs, ministers, and this House. How does the minister envision these type of pervasive barriers are going to be removed? In what time frame? Or could the minister commit today to working with the legislature to get our House in order, so to speak, as it relates to digital accessibility?
Minister.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that the member will know that we sometimes get acronymed, quite a few acronyms, so I had to translate a little bit. But as I'm becoming more and more familiar with the ministry, I find out about groups that have been working on issues that I didn't even perhaps know exactly what was happening. But I want to just start by saying that all forms of communication are important, and we recognize that, and we recognize the very many ways of that people communicate, and respect that. So the Ministry of Citizen Services has been working with our Secretariat in a group called the GDX, the Government Digital Experience Group, which has which built an access and inclusion toolkit. And I believe that this is going to assist different areas of government to become more accessible. And I think that that work is just going to continue, because truly I agree that government's public-facing services should be accessible, obviously. And with respect to the legislature itself, I don't want to speak for the LAMC or anyone else, but the legislature itself has its own structure, and I think that the member raises very important issues around access to the debates, and I would concur with her thoughts on that.
Member.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. I appreciate that, and that's exactly the kind of work that I was hoping to understand was happening. And with that, I've got one more question, and that is what work. No, let me start differently. I know for a fact there are a great number of talented people with disabilities working inside the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. They are very good people with very smart minds, and I appreciate them. And I appreciate the work the ministry has done to ensure that they are there helping to lead this work. My question is, what is the ministry doing? What is the minister or ministry doing to work with the public service overall, and the Ministry of Finance, Public Service Secretariat, or whatever they're called now, to increase the number of people with disabilities that are brought into the public service broadly? I do know of the work experience program for people with disabilities that government has, which places a dozen or so people a year. But certainly we haven't seen a lot of progress on that in many years, going back many years. And I am hopeful that with the commitment that this government has made to accessibility and inclusion, that need to make a commitment as a provincial and large provincial employer is also being considered. And if the minister could comment on the work that he or his ministry might be doing to see that kind of a hiring plan comes about, similar to the plan made and announced by the federal government with the Accessible Canada Act to hire 5,000 people into public service.
Minister.
Thank you, and to start by thanking the member for questions this afternoon, and I look forward to ongoing discussions. I know we're going to have them, but and that's good. I think the more people understand about the legislation, the better. It's all in all our interests for it to be implemented the way we anticipate and as we've discussed in the past. The Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction has its own diversity and inclusion strategy we have 11% of our employees who self-identify as having a disability. As the member mentioned, the Work Able program, which I've heard more about recently when we were preparing for Accessibility Week. I read some of the testimonials from participants, and it seems to me to be a really a shining light as an opportunity for people to access potential careers in the public service. So I support that, and I think it's shown a lot of really interesting results. So also just recently the PSA has also launched the updated diversity and inclusion initiative with a specific focus on accessibility, and I think that as a key pillar in their work will help to inform our ongoing relationships as we make government and government programs and services more accessible and more inclusive, which is our goal, of course. So thank you to the member.
Member.
Thank you, and Chair, thank you for the time today. Thank the Minister and staff for their forthcoming answers. That was appreciated. I know we do share a great deal of passion for this subject. I know the Minister personally cares deeply about this, and I know the staff in the Ministry take this very seriously as well. So I appreciate the time, and I look forward to more discussions, and certainly as things move forward and as the Parliamentary Secretary conducts his work on reaching out, I look forward to being consulted as we move forward together. Thank you. And with that, I will hand the baton back to the critic.
Minister.
Yeah, and I just want to say I look forward to having further conversations, and I appreciate the members' input. I've always appreciated our discussions over the years, and that's just going to continue. We might have differences of opinion on certain things, but ultimately the goal is the same, and I thank her for her advocacy.
Thank you, member. Thank you, Minister. Recognizing now the member for Peace River North.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you to my colleague from Surrey South for her questions, and again, work on, just echo the Minister, her work on this file over the past number of years as well. Moving on, a few questions around the PWD and income assistance. Just changing gears a little bit. Can the Minister share with us how far in advance did he know that the COVID-19 crisis supplement would be cut in half in advance of the December 8th announcement?
Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the question. And I think everybody was aware that the COVID supplements were referred to as temporary COVID supplements, and they were scheduled to end. I believe the third extension ended at the end of December, if I'm not mistaken.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Did the Minister speak with stakeholders and advocates about the barriers from adding another application process like they did with the BCRB?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and to the member. There was no application for the clients that are under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. If there's a question about others' access and applications for that program, I guess that would be for the Minister of Finance.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the COVID-19 crisis supplement being cut, just wondering in regards to DRIPA, what kind of consultations were done around this?
Minister.
Thank you for the question, to the member's question. The COVID supplement ended, and that's at that point the government decided, or it was argued, and successfully so, that increase to income assistance, a record increase, largest increase ever in the history of the province, $175, was added to people's checks who were in receipt of disability or income assistance. Now, with respect to Indigenous communities, there's an agreement between the province and the federal government that the federal government will match social assistance rates in First Nations community, Indigenous communities, as they say, quote unquote, on reserve. And so that the federal government is responsible for ensuring that those rates are increased. And I speak with, there are a few exceptions to that.
Member.
So just in regards to the assistance numbers that the minister is speaking of, can the minister explain the actual consultation process around First or Indigenous communities within DRIPA, around how they may have come up with this number, or if there was consultation with within the boundaries of DRIPA?
Minister.
Thank you very much. And so generally, the general rule is that we don't say to the federal government how what programs what they need to do with respect to financial arrangements with Indigenous communities. There are arrangements between the federal government and different First Nations organizations or communities, in fact. But that is a relationship between the federal government and the First Nations. We increase social assistance rates, then the federal government generally will enter into whatever their unique arrangements are with the First Nations communities.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Just to further follow up and clarify, Indigenous people that are living off reserve is kind of, I guess, where I'm looking at understanding that those living on reserve have a different set of parameters, but those living off that would fall under, in many aspects, PWD or such. I'm just wondering if there was. It doesn't sound like there was, so I'm just wondering if there was in regards to them.
Minister.
Yeah, the member asked about our consultation on the $175 rate increase, and in particular, I don't think that was a specific topic of discussion. We've heard from Indigenous communities, from individuals, from organizations, associations, that people wanted rates increased. And I think that during the discussions, the regular and ongoing discussions that my ministry has with Indigenous representatives of other organizations and agencies, we heard the same kind of thing through our ongoing regular consultation process, that the general sense was not just for people with disabilities, but income assistance rates as well. And I know that the member doesn't often talk about the income assistance rates, just disability income assistance rates, but both of those categories of support and assistance were raised in a record increase of $175.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering what the minister's reaction was to disability advocates. I mean, it was certainly no secret. There was a trending hashtag, the hashtag 300 clawback. So I'm just wondering what the reaction was by the minister and the ministry's office that this was perceived as a clawback.
Minister.
Well, I thank the member for the question, and quite frankly, in speaking to the people that I know who are income assistance and disability assistance, the permanent 175 increase was a very welcome act on the part of our government. And while there were advocates and there were obviously members of the opposition who characterized things in a way that met their needs, for whatever they were, I understand. We all would like to do more. We would all Obviously, this was a decision made by government, but I'd point out that a $325 increase since the government was sworn in 2017, I think is a significant step in the right direction. I would say it's a 50% increase, and I would also point out that after 10 years of no action, people were pleased that finally we had a government that was listening to the people. So there may have been some that characterized the end of a temporary supplement as a clawback. It would be inaccurate. There were many people who were pleased that the province implemented the largest single increase ever. And I think if there was ever any narrative about the provision of income and social assistance to people of British Columbia, that narrative was that the previous government ignored the calls, the repeated calls from the very same advocates that the member references now, calling for an increase in social assistance and disability assistance rates. So when I had the opportunity to implement a record increase in social assistance and disability assistance to bring us from below the middle of the pack nationally to close to the top of the pack nationally, I think it was a time for all British Columbians to be pleased. Obviously, it was during a time when we were preoccupied by the health crises and people were looking for good news. And I think that at the end of the temporary supplement, people were pleased that, in fact, government did make a historic decision, I think, and one that has been widely appreciated as an important step to address not just our poverty reduction strategy, but to improve the quality of life of families and individuals throughout the province. So the $175 permanent increase was received with appreciation, recognizing that the temporary supplement had ended.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, we are speaking today on the 2021 budget and looking forward. And what British Columbians are looking for is leadership right now from the ministry and moving forward. So, well, there's no win by hashing the past. It's what can we do now. And one of my roles here is as the opposition critic and as the minister understands full well our role. He sat in this role just a few short years ago. We still have poverty advocates sitting out on the front lawn often. The minister reflects on people that have reached out to him and said they're happy and everything is merry, but that simply isn't the case. The reality is poverty advocates were very shocked when the $300 temporary supplement and realized the word temporary was part of it initially, but people were shocked at a time during the pandemic that this cut did happen. Of course, we did see the $175 increase that was brought in, and people were generally, okay, there's a start, but it was still a far cry from what many were expecting. And again, and I know the minister is probably he's been tagged in many of the same posts that I've been tagged from different groups and people around the province. So it is something that we'll continue to follow up on, and I'm sure that the minister will continue to have folks reach out to his office for as well. Just after I know our last estimate questions, I know when I referred to our transition binder, the page numbers don't match the reality of his page numbers. So I do want to just read one little piece here. It's the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. It's the 30, 60, 90-day issue summary as at December 2020. And there's a piece here. It says December 16th temporary COVID-19 crisis supplement unless an extension is approved by December 15th. Was the minister aware, and again, realizing that he was freshly in the seat for the most part, but was the minister aware that this decision could have been reversed by December 15th of 2020?
Minister.
I thank the member for the question, and the date references a point in time where the back end of the system needs to have advanced information with respect to what the system change might need to be, and we also want to make sure that people who are in receipt of income assistance have some sort of predictability as to what amount of money they'll be receiving on a monthly basis. And I would just want to point out, the member referenced the idea that people reached out to me to tell me about their pleasure or whatever, or dancing around about social assistance rates. I didn't say that. I said I talked to people that I know who are on income assistance and disability assistance, people that I know and I speak to anyway. And so I just wanted to point out that, you know, when we talk about increasing rates for people who are living in poverty or people who are vulnerable in our society, we're not talking about fixing everything, unfortunately, but we are talking about moving towards achieving our goals of Together BC, our poverty reduction strategy. And I would point out that after years of calling for a poverty reduction strategy, I was so pleased that we put one and put it into legislation with goals and timelines and achievable measures and expectations. And we've been successful in reducing poverty, and we're going to continue to make every effort to reduce poverty in this province, because we, as a government, consider poverty reduction a priority, not only for the betterment of the people who are living in British Columbia, but for all British Columbians, in fact. So I just wanted to make sure that the member didn't get the impression that I said that after we increased income assistance rates by the largest amount ever in this province, that resulted in celebrations. I wasn't saying that. I was saying that people were pleased that we provided a permanent increase to rates that hadn't been raised under their watch, but had already begun to be raised under our current watch. In fact, by $325 since 2017, representing a 50% increase. So I just wanted to clarify that for the member.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. On December 14th, 2020, the Premier said, and I'll quote here, "The crisis supplement was only recently reduced so that we could get it into the budget process and make any increase permanent in the years going forward." Did the Minister and the Premier have this intention set before they made their announcement on December 8th?
Sir.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. May I ask the member if he would mind repeating his question?
Member.
Absolutely, Chair. So on December 14th, 2020, the Premier said, and I quote, "The crisis supplement was only recently reduced so that we could get it into the budget process and make any increases permanent in the years going forward, end quote. Question, did the minister and the premier have this intention before they made their announcement on December the 8th?
Minister.
Well, the member will appreciate that since I'd already been a minister for over a week at the time, that really my memory of every incident and event should be very clear in my mind. But as you might expect, there might have been some cloudiness there. But did the government have an intent to permanently raise the rates? Yes.
Member.
Thanks. I figured after a week you'd have the whole ministry all sorted out by then. So thanks, Chair. So what I'm looking at is, and you alluded, or the minister alluded to it, that this was the plan. So my next question was going to be that, was this just a reaction due to the public outcry regarding around the $300 clawback, which again was the reaction from the public in general. But I think the minister has just told me, and I'll let him correct me if I'm incorrect, that this was the intent all along, to do the $300 temporary and then roll it back to $175. And I'll ask the minister just to confirm if I've got that right.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair and the member. The intent since 2017 was to increase the rates, and we did begin that actually in 2017. And of course, when 2020 came around, we implemented, instituted a COVID supplement, and ultimately that COVID supplement was extended by 3-month timeframes until the end of March of this year, actually. And so during the budget process, that's when we decided, we made the decisions around permanent rate increase.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Can the minister share the costs of the $175 increase, as well as what the $300 increase would have been?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And the answer that I have for the member is that these increases for income assistance and disability assistance amounted to a total of $363.7 million for the 2021-22 year, and that number goes up approximately $5 million in the next 2 years. With respect to what the $300 would have cost, I can get back to the member on that. I don't have that number in front of me, but it's not quite as simple as just dividing and multiplying. We'll get that number for them.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the minister for that and the follow-up. Appreciated. The CRB is expected to likely not go beyond September of this year. The $363.7 million that the minister just referenced, that the $175 increase would go up. Has the minister taken into consideration the possible and likely uptick in the number of people that will possibly be needing this support if the CERB is not continued?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. One thing that I found out when I got to the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction was what an amazing amount of statistical records and analysis that they do right in our ministry, and I'm really pleased to have that. Yes, the short answer to the member is yes. We anticipate, predict, guess. No, we don't guess. We have a very competent crew that makes sure that we know what could be coming, and so we do anticipate if there's a change to federal programs, what impact that may or may not have on the ministry. So yes, we do.
Member.
A quick question, and just talking about stats and data and numbers. What is the expected uptick? Has the ministry projected what this might look like?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and to the member that there are a number of factors that may go into affecting what the implications of the federal government ending or changing any program. So we have a general idea because other factors do influence the result, any possible change to federal programs, and we have between 10 and 20,000 people expected in terms of caseload change. So between 10,000. But I'll just make sure I have the answer correct.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and for the member, yes, we're approximating around 10,000 people.
Member.
Great. Thank you, Minister. Can we get an approximate number attached to that 10,000 people, what that might look like as a line item, the amount?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And the member, it's approximately $21 million.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Does the minister intend, and I think we've heard this already, but does the minister intend to introduce further increases to the income and disability assistance?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Honourable Chair. And people who know me would know that I would like to see income raise, obviously, and that any efforts we can do to further our targets of the Together BC Poverty Reduction Strategy would be welcome. But as the member likely knows, we'll be going into a budget process for the next fiscal year, which will include discussions around numerous aspects of government policy, including poverty reduction options, and the deliberations will likely be broad and involve all possible ideas. But we've read carefully the studies that we've been provided, and the policy proposals that we've heard, and that's going to be the process of the next budget round.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. The minister's own basic income panel came back with a recommendation to keep the $300. So I'm just wondering what the conversation and the consultation was with the panel in regards to only coming up with the only doing the $175 top up. What those conversations look like.
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And the member asked a question about the expert panel on basic income, and there were a number of recommendations from that very comprehensive report that we received very gratefully. The ideas contained therein provide us with a lot to contemplate. After the government announced that record increase to rates, and while it didn't coincide with the number put forward by the basic income panel, it was acknowledged as an important and good step in the right direction. So we will continue to look for other ways of ensuring that we meet our Together BC poverty reduction strategies, and the basic income panel's report is an important part of that.
Thank you. Members, we will now take a 5-minute recess while we undertake cleaning and safety protocols in preparation for a new committee chair.
Okay, I now call the committee back to order. Thank you, members, for your patience. Continuing debate, I recognize the member for Peace River North.
I'm not sure why. I thought the minister was starting, but no, it is me. Thank you, Chair. Welcome to the chair. Just to follow up on, just want to make sure I get this right here. The recommendations we were talking about, the moving forward increases and such. Just wondering if those increases around that are also going to be, or if the minister is also going to be looking at the senior supplement as well on increases.
Well, thank you,
Minister.
Honorable Chair.
Sorry.
Appreciate you being in the chair, and welcome. And it's always nice to see colleagues interacting with this estimates process. And to the member, you know, I'm not going to rule anything out. I'm not going to put stuff on the table but the process of determining government priorities is a complex one, and we are going to look at all factors that influence the decisions that my ministry makes. And, you know, the member asked specifically about the seniors supplement, and I would point out that there was a program that was initiated in 1987, and I'm pleased that in 2021 we raised it for the first time, and we're glad to do so, and in doing so improved the lives of many British Columbians.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And so very, very simply then, the intent is not to raise it, but it is to go through the process, is what the ministry, or is what the minister, I believe, just said. So I'm going to go back to a question. I did jump ahead on this question because I didn't quite finish off the question before we did a short recess around consultation within the basic income, the minister's panel. The minister had mentioned that there was, I think he mentioned there was discussions. I was going to ask this follow-up before the recess. What was the response of the basic income panel when the recommendation of maintaining a $300 supplement was not followed?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And to the member, I don't believe that anyone thought that government was going to implement 62 recommendations just like that. The response of the panel was to government's policies has been that we are taking the steps in the right directions. They saw some of the programs, earning exemptions as an example, as very positive. A positive policy development. So there was no negativity with respect to government's decisions to reduce poverty further, and we continue on this process as it's a project that needs ongoing work on the part of government.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. recognizing there were numerous recommendations by the panel. Obviously, this one was quite timely as it was around the public outcry, the discussions, the social media frenzy, the rally out in the front lawn of the legislature. So I guess maybe my final question around this would be, and we've had little snippets of it, but what was the minister's rationale for not immediately implementing the permanent increase of the $300, which was recommended by the panel?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And the member will remember that the Basic Income Panel's overall philosophy and underpinning was of trying to find ways of ensuring that we create a more just society, and that clearly income discrepancy add to inequalities and inequities in our society, but the overall goal of reducing poverty and creating a more just society include government investing in important social programs and social services as well. I would just point out record investments in childcare constitute important element of creating that more just society. Major increases in housing to ensure that we continue to work towards reducing homelessness and working on issues around affordability. I would also want to mention that the Basic Income Panel pointed to the importance of accessibility to access to trades, training programs, education and such. And I think that when seen as a full overall Basic Income Panel report, the member and, in fact, members of the panel also acknowledge that this government has taken some very important strides in very important correct direction, and I would characterize the moves that government has made to be generally met with favor in the community.
Member.
Thank you, Chair, and obviously, trades and education are important. Those were some of the recommendations, but I never got the answer that I'd asked, which was what was the direct rationale of the Basic Income Panel saying keep the $300? So what was the minister's rationale on why that was not kept?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I think the member knows that the budgeting process is a complex one that requires deliberation on a number of topics, and choices and decisions and conclusions have to be reached, and clearly in our province there is there are important priorities, and we felt that as a government a largest single increase to the income assistance and disability assistance rates, and an increase to the seniors supplement for the first time ever, and an increase to the comforts allowance were important and principled steps toward our goal, which is to continue to reduce poverty in this province for adults and children. And I think that when government makes decisions, it's understandable that people ask questions about why they've made one decision over the other. I would say that a government that's made a record increase in income and disability assistance, which amounted to a 50% increase since this party took government in 2017, I say that's a fairly good degree of success in terms of income support. And when you combine that with our record investments in housing and in childcare and education and training, I can think that the fair-minded individual observing government would say that the government is meeting the goals that it's set for itself and the expectations that people have of it, and that is to reduce poverty, a complex issue with many ways of contributing to that reduction, including income, including childcare, including better labor standards, something I hadn't mentioned yet. In fact, improving labor standards is a significant contributor towards more secure work. And the member, I'm the first to say that government will continually have important work to achieve, and we're glad to be doing it, and we'll be glad to be doing it faster than we would have seen under previous government. I would put it that way, and I'm confident that we're going to continue in this direction.
Member.
Thank you, Chair, but we are indeed talking about this government, and that is where my questions come around. Unfortunately, I still did not get an answer out of that. I mean, I understand, or maybe I can summarize an answer that I think I might have taken out of that is government has made a record increase, and we taken that under as part of our consideration, and don't think there's a requirement for more, or that's kind of what I take out of it. The minister said the decision was made not to increase it because there was already record increases. They're looking at other ways to do poverty reduction. So I just want to ask the minister if I'm correct on that summary.
Minister.
Well, I would just suggest to the member, if he wants a really simple answer, he has to ask a very simple question. And we're talking about poverty, which is a complex issue, and one that I'm proud that our ministry is addressing head on. You know, we made our intentions quite clear, I think, as a government in 2017 when we increased income assistance rates $100. We increased them again $50, and in 2020 we increased $175. So I think the intention of government is clear that our efforts to reduce poverty include income assistance rates. We're looking at all possible ways of reducing poverty. We're open to suggestions from the members opposite if they have any, and we're pleased to continue to work towards a goal that I would presume we all are all interested in. Despite perhaps the lack of action of the previous government, I'm proud of the fact that we as a government have taken important and very, I would say, laudable steps towards addressing the poverty issues that we face in this province, and we're going to continue to do that.
Member.
Thank you, Chair, and still never got the full answer that I was hoping for, but I'll move on. Just a final few questions on CLBC around, first of all, the question comes kind of out of the transition binder, Ministry of Social Development Poverty Reduction Program Overview from October 5th, 2020. Basically says some CLBC funded services such as community inclusion or day programs, employment and respite services were disrupted by the pandemic, increasing stress on families and caregivers who are required to take on extra duties. Can the minister elaborate on these challenges and what the ministry has done to relieve these pressures?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And the member asked about government and CLBC response to COVID and the pressures that COVID put on families and caregivers and providers of services to people who receive services from Community Living BC. And I just want to acknowledge that we know that the struggles felt by so many British Columbians during this past 15 months has been perhaps more acute on those families whose regular support systems and programs were obviously challenged in terms of their ability to operate. And as such, I just want to say how pleased I was that Community Living BC has been going beyond by ensuring that the people they serve continue to access the services, and a lot of programs were put in place. CLBC responded by putting safety guidelines in place, deploying IT supports to allow staff, for example, to work from home where possible. Some staff worked in rotation with others. The CLBC continued to follow its emergency response plan and reach out to supported individuals, families, and service providers in order to stay connected. Government provided an approval in principle for an allocation of up to $35.5 million for temporary emergency funding to provide additional support to residential services. So throughout the pandemic, government and Community Living BC committed to providing information and support to prevent the transmission of the virus amongst the people of CLBC supports. We had regular meetings with caregivers and families, along with Dr. Bain Smith from the Provincial Health Office. Information was shared, supports were provided, communication was enhanced. Everyone involved deserves a lot of credit for seeing the situation as it was, as it is, and responding with due consideration to the challenges that they faced. And government, as I say, we were working in conjunction with the caregivers and the providers, and we appreciate all the efforts people made.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Just reading from the same document, just a little bit further down, the Ministry and CLBC continue to work together to find solutions to address ongoing service demands in a measured, responsible, and sustainable manner. How does the Minister plan on balancing the expected increase in service demand with current funding levels?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thanks to the member for the question. Budget 2021 provided incremental increases to Community Living BC of $367.5 million over the 3-year plan. To break it down for the member, a $150.6 million increase over the next 3 years to address caseload growth, $187.9 million for 3 years to fund wage increases negotiated under the Sustainable Services Negotiating Mandate for unionized staff and service providers, and $29 million over 3 years to support recruitment and retention initiatives for non-union and hybrid community social service providers, also known as partially certified community social service providers. So that's a total of $367.5 million. Member.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Can the Minister share how many people are participating in CLBC's LIFE, L-I-F-E, acronym, based employment services?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. There currently, or up to now, there have been 5 pilot projects, and we can get the member the specific numbers.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. This year, the CLBC service plan has a metric for percentage of individuals supported by CLBC funded employment services reporting current employment that retained employment for a period of a year or more. This number dropped from 81% 2019-2020 to 50% in 2021. And of course, understanding the challenges. However, projecting out to 2023-24, it says that it will only recover to 70%. What are the barriers? Can the minister share? What are the barriers? What barriers are preventing people from gaining long-term employment? And what is the ministry doing to improve these rates?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Yeah, the member is correct in identifying the impact of the COVID pandemic on employment for people that Community Living BC supports. In fact, an estimated 50% of those who are working, that's about 2,600 individuals losing their employment. And in January this year, we announced $10 million to help support funding for CLBC to provide employment service providers with help getting those individuals back to work, recognizing that they're often, in some situations, they lose their job early when there's a pressure, and oftentimes it could be that they have more challenges getting back into the workforce. But I'm pleased that we've identified that as an issue and provided $10 million in addition to focus on getting people back to work. And the Reimagining Community Inclusion Group has a list of priorities, and on it, at the top of that is employment. We're working on ensuring that people who want to work have access to work. We work with the President's Group, who identify companies that are willing to take measures to proactively address employment opportunities for people who may be served by Community Living BC or people with disabilities. So that work will continue, and I don't think I missed. We also it's important to point out increased earning exemptions to $15,000 annually for people on income assistance, disability assistance.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes my questions. So just want to thank the Minister for his time, and thank the ministry staff as well. And please pass on to the others in your ear or your head, wherever you want to call them, that are obviously working throughout the ministry. Thank them for all of their hard work and dedication, as well as my staff and colleagues that have participated in this. And certainly thank you to all the advocates across the province of British Columbia, the service providers. We know that probably never before have they been leaned on so much to provide services to British Columbians that need them. So we understand social development and poverty reduction. It's a complex issue. Obviously, I'm offering myself to work with the minister as well, and moving forward, and hope that it's a reciprocal thing as well. I know the Minister, you've been fairly quick in replying to any of my inquiries, so hope that we can continue to do that. And with that, I'll close my remarks and thank the Chair and the Legislature staff for their time as well. Oh, and answered.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, I ask the Minister if they would like to make any closing remarks before I call the vote.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Minister. Thank you, Honourable Chair. And I'd like to thank the member for Peace River North for his questions. I think British Columbians are well served when there's a critic who considers his file or their file an important one, and who takes an active interest in the betterment of life for British Columbians. And so it's a pleasure to answer questions. We can ask and answer questions anytime, as far as I'm concerned. And I appreciate the questions, the spirit in which they were asked, and I know that he has staff people helping. I don't just guess that, I know that, because that's the way things are, and continue to offer any help I can for his constituents or others. So with that, I have no further comment, Honourable Chair.
Thank you, Minister, and all members. Seeing no further questions, I will now call the vote. Those participating remotely should prepare their voting cards. Okay. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Motion carried. Thank you, members. The committee will now take a 5 to 10 minute recess while we prepare for the Ministry of Children and Family Development. I call Committee of Supply, Section C, back to order. We're meeting today to consider the budget estimates of the Ministry of Children and Family Development. I now recognize the Minister to move the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I move vote number 20. Resolve that a sum not exceeding $2,392,755,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Ministry of Children and Family Development Ministry operations to the 31st of March 2022.
Minister, do you have any opening remarks?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, on whose land we do our work, and also to acknowledge the Chianu Nation, who I also represent here in the Legislature. I'd also like to say thank you for the work of the team of over 5,000 ministry staff who dedicate themselves each and every day to children and families across British Columbia. This week is BC Child and Youth in Care Week, a time to celebrate diversity, resiliency, and the success of young people in and from care. So many ministry staff work directly with young people and are contributing to their success. I thank them, as well as staff at delegated Aboriginal agencies and community agencies, for their tireless work, especially over this past tough year. And a special thanks as well to my executive team for leading the ministry through a demanding and challenging year. My Deputy Minister, Alison Bond, here with me today, my Assistant Deputy Ministers, Teresa Dobmeier, Carolyn Camper, Denise Devaney, Rob Byers, Sheila Robinson, Kavina Hall, and Corey Hevner. Their commitment and determination are helping to bring about a vital transformation in the way we serve children, youth and families in BC. And of course, I'd like to recognise the Minister of State for Childcare for the passion and dedication she brings to building an inclusive, affordable, quality, universal childcare system for BC families. I am thrilled to be working as part of this team. And I'm very honoured to stand up today and talk about the progress we've made in making life better for BC's children, youth and families, and the investments we're making to continue that progress. Now, with COVID-19, it must be acknowledged, it's been a hard year for everyone, particularly for children, youth and families. Through it all, we've stayed focused, not only on supporting people through the pandemic, but also on continuing to make life better for the future. As soon as the pandemic hit, my ministry worked quickly to put emergency measures in place to ensure that children, youth and families we serve were supported. For example, we're ensuring that youth and young adults in our care continue to have a safe, secure home by extending key emergency measures until March 31st, 2022. This means that youth in care who turn 19 can stay in their current home until they can more safely transition to independence. Until September, young adults will have additional flexibility in accessing the Agreements with Young Adults programme, which helps cover the cost of things like housing, childcare, tuition, and healthcare, while young adults go back to school or attend mental health services, rehabilitation, vocational or life skills programs. And for the first time, young adults using the emergency housing supports who are eligible for the AYA program can apply for both programs at the same time. And having spent time with these youth, even though virtually, I know how important this is to them. We know this past year has been especially hard on families of children and youth with support needs. So we've adjusted our services to prioritise these vulnerable young people and their families. My ministry brought in measures to help alleviate some of the stress caused by the pandemic, including giving families the ability to use their respite funding in a broader, more flexible way. One family I know bought a freezer so they didn't have to go grocery shopping so often. Another one paid for housekeeping. And on top of this, we're continuing to invest in services that support families and help children achieve their full potential. Budget 2021 includes a $13 million increase for children with support needs in their families, and that includes more than $2 million for deaf and hard of hearing services, the first major boost to the programme in over 10 years. And we continue to work on implementing a new service framework so children and youth with support needs can get the help and services they need at the right time, no matter where they live in BC. I'm pleased to say we've also had the first meeting of our Advisory Council on Children and Youth with Support Needs, and that was in early May. And we were thrilled to get such a positive response to creating the Council. And I'm really looking forward to our upcoming meetings and the input of the Council as we ensure families are at the centre of our work. A key part of my mandate is focused on improving child protection services. And part of this means finding safe alternatives to bringing children into care, and especially addressing the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in care. As members know, for too long, there have been system-wide practices that have failed Indigenous children and their families. The trauma suffered by generations of Indigenous children and families has devastating effects. And I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the tragedy of the children who lost their lives and were missing and buried at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. I'm saddened and heartbroken. The children were taken from their family and community that loved them, and the families and communities couldn't properly put them to rest. My thoughts are with the Kamloops Te Shuwetmuk as they struggle with this additional burden, and with the survivors and their families as they relive this experience again. This is a reminder of the violence and harm the Canadian residential school system inflicted upon Indigenous peoples for generations. I know this trauma continues today. While we've made progress, this is re-traumatizing, and we must do more. Since we've been in government, we have worked in partnership with Indigenous peoples to make progress on reconciliation, and this has been a priority for my ministry also. We changed our legislation so that Indigenous communities can have greater involvement early on in contact with the ministry. And we're also amending our policies and practices to be trauma-informed and inclusive of the cultural practices of Indigenous communities in the province. Our government also made budget investments to support foster parents, and for the first time ever, ensured that monthly assistance for families caring for young relatives through the Extended Family Programme are on a par with foster care. This has been especially important for Indigenous families, and as a result, we are now seeing record numbers of children in need of protection staying within their families and connected to their culture and communities. We're seeing the lowest number of children and youth in care in over 30 years, and the lowest number of Indigenous children in care in over 20 years. And that's good news, and we know there is more work to do. Building on these investments in this year's budget, we're providing an increase of more than $9 million for supports for children in care, and more than $13 million to support out-of-care arrangements that keep children with family members and in their communities, because we know children and youth have better outcomes when they can stay connected to family, culture, and community. As well, we continue to work closely with the First Nations Leadership Council and Indigenous communities to ensure Indigenous communities can exercise jurisdiction for child welfare services. And the path to jurisdiction is now much clearer with the passing of the new federal act respecting First Nations, Inuit and Métis children, youth and families. With the new federal act, we are moving even closer to the day when we see the nations exercise their inherent jurisdiction over child and family services. Another top priority and a key concern for government, especially during the pandemic, is supporting mental health and wellness in children and youth. That's why we continue to work with our ministry partners, including health and mental health and addictions, to invest in and improve the programs and services people count on. In Budget 2021, my ministry is increasing funding for child and youth mental health services by over $20 million, bringing the total ministry budget for these services to more than $134 million a year. We know that for many years, families in BC have struggled to get their children the mental health and substance use care they need, and our government is working to change that. The pandemic has shone a light on something we've known for a long time, that access to affordable, quality and inclusive childcare is not simply good social policy, it's vital to BC's economy and to our recovery from COVID-19. Despite the pandemic, we're building an inclusive universal childcare system that will support BC families for generations to come. Improving access to childcare supports our economic recovery by creating more opportunities for parents, particularly mothers, to go back to work or school and give kids the best possible start. From business owners to families, everyone reaps the economic and social benefits of a more engaged workforce. Through Budget 2021, more families will have access to affordable, quality and inclusive childcare and will invest in early childhood educators, the workforce who are behind the workforce and the heart of childcare. And I'm very pleased that this year's budget also supports the transition of 400 childcare spaces to Aboriginal Head Start spaces. My colleague, the Minister of State, will have so much more to say on all the progress our government has made in just a few short years. As the new Minister of Children and Family Development and the former Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity, I'm very proud to say that we've invested an historic $2 billion in the first 3 years of Childcare BC, our 10-year plan to deliver universal inclusive childcare to BC families. And Budget 2021 builds on that momentum so that together we can emerge from COVID-19 stronger than ever. As Minister of Children and Family Development, I am committed to making lives better for children, youth and families across our province. There's a lot more to do, but I am confident that we've already made some very important changes and we are on the right track. I very much look forward to the questions from the member opposite and from her colleagues. Thank you.
I now recognize the member for West Vancouver Capilano. Do you have any opening remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Yes, I do. Thank you. Pardon me. I'd like to start by thanking the Minister. She's got a career of supporting children and families in the province of BC and has a real appreciation for the issues that families are challenged with in British Columbia, and I think this will be a benefit to all of us. I'd also like to thank the MCFD staff who work so hard getting prepared for estimates. I know that they're never quite sure what we're going to ask, so they have to pull everything for the Minister, so I do appreciate and know that that's a lot of hard work. I was very fortunate in the few years that I did work in the social services sector to enjoy a good relationship with the staff at MCFD, the procurement and the contract managers and directors. They're all very capable and caring people. And it bears repeating that I know that we all share the horror and grief of the news this week of the discovery of the mass grave site at the Kamloops Residential School. We have no greater gift and no greater responsibility than our children, and I know that's why the people here are in the room doing the work that they're doing. My heart and wishes are with all of those communities who lost their children and all Indigenous peoples across our country. So thank you, Chair, and I'm going to begin by passing the initial questioning to the Leader of the Third Party. Thank you.
Okay, I now recognize the Leader of the Third Party. If you have any opening remarks, I welcome that as well.
No, I think I can just jump into questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think starting with today and starting with where people are at across Canada and here in the province and the comments we heard in the Legislature, it's important to recognize that the implications around the impacts of removal of children from families, particularly Indigenous families, is deeply connected to the historical roots of colonialism and the violence that has happened to Indigenous families throughout the last 160 years in this province and in this country. And that a lot of the conversation today and in the past several days has come back to this practice continues in Canada. Children continue to be removed from their families and from their communities. And I know that the Minister in her opening comments spoke about progress, spoke about the lowest number of children in care, the lowest number of Indigenous children in care. I guess I'll start there, which is, can the Minister more clearly define progress, particularly when it comes to Indigenous children and families and communities in this province, and how progress in her mind is measured.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the member for the question as well. And I want to start by acknowledging there is a lot more to do and that this is a really, really important matter and it's a priority for our minister as well. And to acknowledge the child welfare system is overly involved in the lives of Indigenous children and families. And as the member commented in terms of the news as well, you know, there is that connection of that over-involvement dating back to residential schools and beyond, and it needs to stop. So the ministry has been working hard to transform the system and to address this over-representation of Indigenous children in the care system. And while we've taken steps to improve, for example, how we share information with Indigenous communities to be able to, as I said in my opening remarks, to be able to build that relationship and make that connection before making decisions about taking steps in relation to a child. We know, you know, what that needs is more support for Indigenous families as well. And we've all heard calls from Indigenous leaders and from other areas like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we need to be addressing this. And I have asked my staff to work closely with Indigenous partners and with Indigenous leaders, and I know that work is being done, and I thank my staff for all of the work they're doing in that area. We remain committed to making sure we achieve our goal of keeping children and youth connected to family, to community, and to culture. And we need to be doing that, working in partnership with Indigenous leaders and Indigenous nations. Thank you.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you. So I'll start with one specific example, and the minister speaks of work, and the only specific was in there was sharing information with Indigenous nations. The Métis Nation has been working on trying to get a memorandum of understanding agreement with Ministry of Children and Families so that the oversight and care for Métis children would be moved over to the Métis Nation. Can the minister give an update on where ministry is at in terms of timeline for completion of that MOU? And in the meantime, does the ministry have a plan to pay for the appropriate service level for Métis children being provided by Métis Nation at this time?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the member. So just a couple of other specifics as well related to supporting Indigenous children and youth staying with their families and receiving services. We did introduce the extended family payment that I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks as well. And what that did was it got rid of what previously would have possibly been an inequality between having children in the care system compared to being cared for in extended family. So increased those options. And also, I mentioned in my earlier remarks as well that we have more funding in the budget this year for out-of-care options as well. So that's supporting Indigenous children and youth staying connected to family and community and culture. In relation to Métis, in June 2018, Métis Nation British Columbia, MNBC and the Ministry signed a joint commitment document, and that commits the parties to collaboratively work towards MNBC authority over child welfare for Métis children and families in BC. So that's probably the document, the MOU, that the member was asking about. And even since the signing of that document, there have been amendments to the provincial legislation, the Child, Family and Community Service Act, and also there's been the enactment of the Federal Act respecting First Nations, Inuit and Métis children and youth and families, along with, of course, the Provincial Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act as well. So all of these signal and support continuing to work very closely with MNBC. We have 2 tables where we're actively involved in talking about all of these relevant items. So there's a Métis working table, and there's also a Métis practice table as well. So staff has been working really hard in partnership with MNBC. We also do have Métis delegated Aboriginal agencies that are fully funded as well. And indeed in 2018-19, 2019-20, we also provided funding to MNBC to flow through to agencies.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for that. One of the concerns that the Métis Nation has raised is that non-Indigenous Ministry Children and Family Services developed service for children and youth with special needs, youth justice, complex needs supports, family planning conferences, and they're getting paid $40 an hour to run these. Whereas the Métis Nation has either not been given the opportunity to develop these services or are funded at 50% of what the non-Indigenous partners are funded at. Can the Minister speak specifically to funding for Métis Nation in order for them, as she points out, to gain the authority over their children?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the member. So the information that you provided just then is new to us and it's new to Ministry staff. Ministry staff would be more than happy to talk to MNBC about the range of services that they would like to see provided to their community members. Would be happy to continue having those discussions. And there are active tables that are already in place for those discussions to be had. But we will take that back and we'll have a look at that as well. Thank you.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going to move on again, considering the news from last week and the overall situation for Indigenous children in care. And the representative for children and youth had a report come out in December of 2020 called Illuminating Service Experience, a descriptive analysis of injury and death reports for First Nation children and youth in BC 2015 to 2017. And in the executive summary, it stated that the data examined for this report found 87 deaths and 1,067 injuries reported for First Nations children and youth. Additionally, 200 care plans of First Nations youth with reported injuries were explored to examine issues important to First Nation leadership, service providers, and community members. And the representative noted the following from the data: 1/3 of deaths reported for First Nations children and youth were unexpected. Most injuries reported for First Nations youth were female identifying youth. Injuries reported for First Nations youth were most commonly reported for those placed in foster homes. Injuries were most commonly reported for older youth. Sexual assaults and suicide attempts were most commonly reported for both First Nations children and youth and non-Indigenous children and youth, and physical assault injuries and caregiver mistreatment were reported more commonly for First Nations children and youth than non-Indigenous children and youth. I'm wondering, since this report was received in December of 2020, what action specifically has the ministry taken in light of these revelations?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So since the period of the report, which was 2015 to 2017, the provincial government has changed the legislation, so the Children and Family Services Act. And that's that really important change there is what we talked about before, where it's possible to share information with Indigenous communities before action is taken in terms of a child, so that it's possible to have that conversation and talk about where there might be a safe place for that child or youth to stay within family or within community. And so that helps keep children and youth connected to family, community and culture. And also since then the federal legislation has actually been enacted as well. And again, that directs us to make sure that we're working closely with Indigenous communities to exercise their jurisdiction. And so we have actually been doing a lot of work engaging with Indigenous communities on jurisdiction as well. And in addition to that, we've brought in increases in rates for carers, as I talked about before, so that has made it more possible and provided more capacity for children and youth to stay with Indigenous communities and family members. And in fact, what we're seeing now is historic lows of numbers. We're seeing a high number of an increase of Indigenous children and youth being cared for in out-of-care placements, so that's placements with other family members and community members, and the rate of bringing children and youth into care is going down and has been going down as well. We also work very hard at making sure that there was really good cultural planning with Indigenous children and youth as well, making sure that they were connected and engaged with culture and community.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so on that, I think the connection between legislation, practice standards, intentions, and outcomes is also a really important one to look at. So I've been reviewing some of the resource practice audits and the family service practice audits. The audits of practices are the ones that I've had a chance to have a look at. For the 2019 Family Service Practice Audit, South Vancouver Island Service Delivery Area, the overall compliance rate was 52%. For the 2020 Resource Practice Audit, South Vancouver Island Service Delivery Area, the overall compliance rate was 36%. And this includes things that the Minister has actually just spoken to, but also importantly, things like initial screening of prospective caregivers, assessment of prospective caregivers and family care homes, renewal of CCRC and CRRA checks, sharing placement information with caregiver, that was a 4% achievement rate. Caregiver continuing learning and education was a 6% achievement rate. Reportable incidences, like the ones that are mentioned in the report by the Representative for Children and Youth, a 29% achievement rate. Allowable number of children in home, 39% of homes had too many children. Supportive practice had a higher achievement rate in the 80s. Conducting quality of care review was unfortunately 100% not achieved. And I just bring this up because I think that there's often a sense of disconnect between, and I'm sure that the Deputy Minister has heard me say this many, many times, but a sense of disconnect between what gets said in this building or in these rooms or in the chamber and what is experienced on the ground. And what we see experienced on the ground in our constituency offices is often not happy stories, not a sense of things have changed, just a sense of things continue to go along in the same way. And for example, an example of systemic inequity in the system is one where, on the one hand, MCFD has lawyers that are earning government salaries and endless resources in terms of the legal representation, whereas parents are often faced with overburdened legal aid lawyers or no legal representation at all. And this is a systemic imbalance in the system. I just heard from my CA about a mother who has done everything she could, ticked every box. I mean, her audit would be 100%, but she was told, well, it's you need to go to court. We're going to decide whether there's going to be a continuing custody order or not. And she did not have legal representation, and she's up in court with the ministry being represented by salaried lawyers. So a kind of a two-part question here in terms of the minister's take on these practice audits. Does the minister review these? And what is the response of ministry? And I've been looking at these practice audits year over year. They typically don't tend to come out particularly well. Some service areas certainly do better than others, but when you have a 36 or a 52% compliance rate with practice standards within a ministry that is involved in the most intimate and essential relationships that we have in our lives between parents and children, to me this would feel quite urgent, that the standards of practice are not being met. And so all the intention, all the legislation, all of the reforms are not necessarily being translated into practice or into outcomes. And so I guess my question to the minister really is around how to square that circle when there are these kinds of audits coming out, and also the input that we are all receiving, I expect, in our constituency offices of ongoing struggles and challenges that families experience, particularly Indigenous families experience in their interactions with MCFD.
Minister.
Thank you, and thank you to the member. And yes, we do look at the practice audits, and it's a concern for all of us. And what we want to do is make sure that we are actually evaluating the impact on families and for families, the benefits for families and for children and youth. I do want to appreciate the work of all of our staff. It's difficult work that they're doing, and especially during this pandemic, staff has continued to provide supports and services. And our approach is wherever it's safe to do so, we want to support children and youth staying with their families. And I do recognise that there are inequities in the system, and they have been persistent for far too long. And I want to recognise the work of my predecessor as well, Minister Conroy, who started to make fundamental changes in this ministry in the way that we deliver child welfare services. And we still have a long way to go, and we will continue that work. We do actually have to change the system. As the member pointed out, there are inequities. For now, what we do have is, I can assure the member that audit findings are reviewed by staff, and that might be in the service delivery area or in the delegated Aboriginal agency as well, to make sure that practice concerns and practice strengths are identified too, and to develop an action plan based on compliance ratings too. And each of those action plans is tracked through to its completion. And then it's possible as well for special audits to be conducted where there are identified practice concerns. And 2 special audits were completed in 2020. What's really important, though, as I say, is to change the system, because we actually need to be measuring and tracking how families are actually doing, how children and youth are actually doing, and how the services that we provide are benefiting as well. So we're actually working on developing an outcomes-based quality assurance program to make sure that we're measured as we make shifts in our service delivery as well. We need to make sure that we have good evaluation and outcomes measurement. And we've actually established an advisory circle representing a diverse group of individuals from delegated Aboriginal agencies, First Nation communities, the Métis Commission for Children and Families of BC, as well as First Nation hereditary chiefs. And that's been formed to lead this work moving forwards.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Leader of the third party.
Thank you. I'm wondering, and I'll end it with this, and I think I'll pick up a little bit tomorrow, or my colleague, Sanish North in the Islands will, I'm not sure which of us, but there have been some prominent stories in the media. One was about a social worker, Riley Saunders, who had several victims of clients of his who he stole money from. And one of the points that's been raised, particularly about this case, was that he wasn't actually a social worker. And for a long time, there's been a great number of people who have been advocating for registry of social workers with their professional college, the College of Social Workers. And this is an example where, had the College of Social Workers, if social workers in MCFD were registered with the College of Social Workers, it would have been identified very quickly that this was a person who was not actually a social worker, qualified. And a lot of harm could have been avoided. And while I'm aware that the minister won't speak to any specific cases such as this, but I would like, and this connects back to the practice audits. It connects back to, I think, a very significant need for building and rebuilding of trust, transparency, accountability. And one of the things, again, that we've seen repeated many, many times is that the experience of a person who files a complaint through MCFD, I would say, in 100% of the cases through our constituency office where a complaint has been filed, the outcome has not been a satisfactory one for the complainant. That complaint goes into the ministry, it comes around in a circle and it comes back, and there hasn't yet been a sense from any of the people that we've worked with in our constituency office that that's been a satisfactory process or outcome. So given, and I appreciate the minister's comments about recognizing that there's a lot of work to do, that the system needs really rebuilding, that there's inbuilt inequities, we recognize these. I appreciate the minister acknowledging and recognizing this. The amount of power that particularly a child protection worker has is enormous. And that there isn't, as we expect with any health professional, with chiropractors, with physiotherapists, with social workers working in hospitals, that there is an independent regulatory body overseeing that practice. Can the minister comment on the long-standing calls to have Ministry of Children and Family social workers overseen by the College of Social Workers, and whether this will be something that happens under her watch as minister?
Okay, given the time, I ask the minister to move the motion.
Thank you. Honourable Chair, I move that the committee rise, report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and report progress on the Ministry of Children and Family Development, and ask leave to sit again.
Members, a vote is about to take place, and those participating remotely should prepare their voting cards. Members, the question is that the committee rise, report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Children and Family Development and report Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and report progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Children and Family Development, and seek leave to sit again. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Motion is carried. Thank you, members. This committee now stands adjourned.